Hashtag Story 1. The Whistler of Pine Ridge. Back in the summer of 2019, my buddy Marcus and I decided to do a week-long camping trip in the Cascade Mountains of Washington State. We'd been planning it for months, saving up vacation days, getting all the gear we needed. Marcus had just gone through a rough divorce and I'd been dealing with some heavy stuff at work, so we both needed to disconnect from everything and just be out in nature for a while. We drove up on a Friday morning, parking at the Pine Ridge trailhead around noon. The plan was to hike about 8 miles into the backcountry and set up camp near a lake that Marcus had found on some obscure hiking forum. According to the post he'd read, barely anyone knew about this spot. It was supposed to be pristine, untouched, and completely isolated. The hiking was gorgeous. Late summer in the Cascades is something else entirely. The Douglas firs towered above us, creating this cathedral-like canopy that filtered the sunlight into these perfect golden beams. We saw a black bear from a distance, which was thrilling but not concerning since it was busy eating berries and paid us no attention. By the time we reached the lake, it was around 6 in the evening, and the light was starting to take on that warm amber quality that makes everything look like a painting. The lake was exactly as described. Maybe 100 yards across, perfectly clear water, surrounded by forest on all sides except for a small rocky beach where we set up our tents. There were no signs of other campers, no fire rings, no trash, nothing. We had the place completely to ourselves. That first night was perfect. We cooked dinner over our camp stove, had a couple of beers we'd hauled in, and just talked for hours while watching the stars come out. The Milky Way was so bright you could practically read by it. We finally turned in around midnight, exhausted from the hike but feeling that deep satisfaction that comes from being truly disconnected from the world. I woke up sometime in the middle of the night. I'm not sure what woke me initially, but once I was conscious, I heard it clearly. Someone was whistling. Not a tune exactly, but a series of notes that went up and down in pitch. It was coming from somewhere across the lake in the forest on the opposite shore. My first thought was that there were other campers we hadn't noticed. Maybe they'd come in after dark or had been camping deeper in the woods. But something about the whistling bothered me. It was too measured, too deliberate. And it was the middle of the night. Who whistles at 3 in the morning in the middle of nowhere? I lay there listening for probably 15 minutes. The whistling would stop for a few minutes, then start up again. Same pattern of notes, over and over. I finally unzipped my sleeping bag and crawled out of my tent. Marcus's tent was silent, and I figured he was sleeping through it. The night was cold and I could see my breath in the starlight. The lake was perfectly still, reflecting the stars like a mirror. I stood there on the rocky beach, listening. The whistling came again, and now that I was outside, I could tell it was definitely coming from the far side of the lake. But I couldn't see any lights, any sign of a camp, nothing. I was about to chalk it up to some weird bird or maybe just the forest playing tricks with sounds when the whistling stopped. For about 30 seconds there was absolute silence. Then I heard it again, but this time it was closer. Definitely closer. It was coming from the tree line on our side of the lake, maybe 50 yards to the left of our camp. That's when my brain started sending up alarm signals. Whatever was making that sound had moved. Either it had circled around the lake incredibly quickly, or there were two sources of the sound. Neither explanation made me feel good. I stood there, frozen, staring at the dark tree line. The whistling came again, same pattern of notes, and it was even closer now. Maybe 30 yards away. I couldn't see anything in the darkness under the trees, but I could feel that something was there, watching me. I backed up slowly toward my tent, not taking my eyes off the forest. The whistling stopped. I waited, my heart hammering in my chest. 1 minute passed. 2 minutes. Nothing. Just as I was starting to think maybe I'd scared off whatever animal it was, I heard Marcus whisper from his tent. "Dude, are you hearing this?" "Yeah," I whispered back. "How long have you been awake?" "A while." It woke me up when it was on the other side of the lake. "I thought you were still sleeping." "What do you think it is?" Before Marcus could answer, the whistling started again, and this time it was right at the edge of our camp. I could hear footsteps in the underbrush. Not paws, not hooves. Footsteps. Human footsteps or something walking on 2 legs. "Get in my tent," Marcus hissed. Now. I didn't need to be told twice. I scrambled into Marcus's tent and zipped it shut behind me. He had his hunting knife out, and in the dim light from his phone I could see his face was pale. "I saw something," he whispered. "Just a few minutes ago before you came out. It was standing at the tree line. Tall, like really tall. It was just standing there and I could see its shape against the stars." "Human?" I asked. "I don't know. Maybe. But the proportions seemed wrong. The arms were too long, I think. I only saw it for a second before it moved back into the trees." The whistling had stopped again. We sat there in Marcus's tent, barely breathing, listening to the silence. Minutes crawled by. Then we heard it. Something was walking around our camp. Slow, deliberate footsteps in the gravel and dirt. It circled Marcus's tent once and we could hear it breathing. Deep, raspy breaths that didn't sound quite right. Then it moved to my tent. We heard the zipper being pulled down slowly. Whatever it was opening my tent. I heard it moving around inside and there was this weird snuffling sound like it was smelling my sleeping bag. Marcus had his phone out, his finger hovering over the emergency SOS button. We got a signal this far out, but it was weak, and we both knew that even if we called for help, it would be hours before anyone could reach us. The thing spent maybe 5 minutes in my tent, then came out. The footsteps moved toward the lake and we heard splashing. It was wading into the water. The splashing continued for a while, getting fainter, and then stopped. We waited, listening, but heard nothing more. Neither of us slept the rest of that night. We sat in Marcus's tent with the knife between us, jumping at every sound. When the sun finally started to come up around 6, we carefully unzipped the tent and looked around. My tent was open just as we'd heard. My sleeping bag had been pulled out and was lying on the ground, covered in some kind of slime or saliva. My backpack had been opened and rifled through, but nothing was missing. In the dirt around the camp there were tracks. I've seen bear tracks before. I've seen elk tracks, deer tracks, mountain lion tracks. These were none of those things. They were roughly human-shaped but huge. Probably 18 inches long with 5 distinct toe impressions. But the toes were elongated, almost like fingers. And the spacing between the tracks suggested whatever made them had a stride of at least 5 feet. The tracks led from the tree line to my tent, around Marcus's tent, then down to the lake. In the mud at the water's edge, we could see where they went into the water. There were no tracks coming out. We packed up our camp in record time. We didn't even bother with breakfast. We just threw everything in our packs and started hiking back to the trailhead. The whole way, I kept looking over my shoulder, expecting to see something following us. We made it back to the truck by noon, exhausted and still rattled. On the drive back, Marcus and I barely talked about what happened. It felt like if we didn't talk about it, maybe we could convince ourselves it was just a weird dream or that we panicked over nothing. But a few days later, Marcus sent me a link to an article. It was about the area where we'd been camping. Apparently, there had been reports going back decades of strange encounters in those woods. Hikers and campers reporting something they called the Whistler. Always the same description. Something tall and humanoid that would whistle in the night and approach camps. Some people reported items going missing. Others reported their tents being opened while they slept. One report from 1987 particularly stuck with me. A solo hiker had been camping near the same lake where we'd been. He reported waking up to find something standing over him in his tent, breathing on his face. He said he played dead for over an hour while the thing examined him, and when the sun came up, it left. He hiked out immediately and never went back. The really disturbing part was at the end of the article. It mentioned that in 2003, a hiker had disappeared in that area. His camp was found intact, his belongings undisturbed, but he was never seen again. The search and rescue teams found tracks around his camp that they couldn't identify. Marcus and I have never been back to that area. We still go camping, but we stick to popular, well-traveled campgrounds now. Sometimes, when I'm falling asleep in my tent, I think I hear whistling in the distance. But I tell myself it's just my imagination, just the forest playing tricks. Because the alternative, the possibility that something is still out there, whistling in the dark and looking for its next visitor, is too much to accept. Last summer, I heard from another hiker who'd been in that area. He mentioned hearing whistling in the night. I asked him if he'd seen anything. He said no, But when he woke up in the morning, his tent had been opened while he slept, and his sleeping bag was covered in slime. Some places aren't meant for us. Some parts of the forest hold things we're not supposed to find. And if you're ever camping and you hear whistling in the night, my advice is simple. Pack up and leave. Don't wait for dawn. Don't try to investigate. Just go. Because whatever the whistler is, it's not something you want to meet face to face. ## Story 2. The Ranger Station at Dead Man's Hollow. I worked as a seasonal park ranger for the Forest Service in Northern California from 2016 to 2018. It was a dream job for me at the time. I just graduated with a degree in environmental science, and I wanted to spend my 20s doing something meaningful before settling into a regular career. The pay wasn't great, but I got to live in the forest, help visitors, and feel like I was contributing to conservation efforts. Most of my time was spent at the main ranger station near the park entrance, but occasionally I'd be assigned to man one of the remote stations deeper in the forest. These stations were basically small cabins where rangers would stay during peak season to provide assistance to backcountry hikers and monitor the more isolated areas of the park. In August of 2017, I was assigned to spend 2 weeks at a station we called Dead Man's Hollow. The name came from a gold rush era story about a prospector who died there in the 1850s, supposedly murdered by his partner. The place had a reputation among the rangers. Nobody liked going there. When I was given the assignment, my supervisor, a gruff old-timer named Bill, actually looked sorry for me. "Just keep your radio on and check in every 6 hours," he told me. "And don't go wandering around at night." I asked him what he meant by that, but he just shook his head and said I'd understand when I got there. The other rangers were similarly cryptic. One of them, Sarah, who'd worked there for 5 years, pulled me aside before I left. "Look, I'm not trying to freak you out," she said, "but Dead Man's Hollow is weird. Just trust your gut while you're there. Something feels wrong, radio in. Don't try to be brave." I laughed it off at the time. I figured they were just hazing the new guy, trying to spook me with stories about an old, creaky cabin in the woods. I loaded up my truck with supplies for 2 weeks and drove the 40 miles of rough fire roads to reach the station. Dead Man's Hollow was in a depression between 2 ridges, accessible only by a narrow trail that wound down through dense forest. The station itself was a small, one-room log cabin built sometime in the 1960s. It had a wood stove, a narrow bed, a desk, and a couple of chairs. There was no electricity, just a solar panel that charged a battery for the radio and a couple of lights. Water came from a hand pump outside. The first thing I noticed when I arrived was how quiet it was. In the forest, you usually hear birds, squirrels, insects, wind in the trees. But Dead Man's Hollow was silent. Unnaturally silent. It was the middle of summer, but I couldn't hear a single bird. I unpacked my gear and got settled in. The cabin was musty and smelled like mildew, but it was clean enough. There was a logbook on the desk where previous rangers had logged their stays. I flipped through it, reading entries going back years. Most were routine. Weather observations, notes about hikers passing through, wildlife sightings. But scattered throughout were entries that made me pause. Things like, heard something large moving around the cabin at night. Could not identify. Will investigate in morning. And then the next entry, same ranger, found no tracks or signs of animal. Odd. Another entry from a different ranger, something tried the door handle 3 times last night. Called out but received no response. In morning, found no footprints despite muddy ground. I told myself these were just rangers letting their imaginations run wild in the isolation. But I'd be lying if I said it didn't make me uneasy. The first few days were uneventful. I'd hike the trails during the day, checking on campers, making sure fire regulations were being followed, noting any trail damage that needed maintenance. The work was solitary but pleasant. In the evenings, I'd cook dinner on the wood stove, read by lamplight, and radio in my status reports. The silence continued to bother me though. In all my time hiking around the area, I barely saw any wildlife. No deer, no squirrels, no birds. Just trees and silence. It felt like the forest was holding its breath, waiting for something. On my 4th night there, I woke up around 2 in the morning. It was completely dark in the cabin, darker than dark should be. I fumbled for my headlamp and turned it on. Everything looked normal. I was about to go back to sleep when I heard it. Footsteps on the porch. The cabin had a small covered porch, maybe 6 feet deep, with 3 wooden steps leading up to it. I could clearly hear someone walking across it, their footsteps heavy on the old boards. They walked from one end of the porch to the other, then back again. I sat up in bed, my heart racing. "Hello?" I called out. "Can I help you?" The footsteps stopped. I waited, listening. After about 30 seconds, they started again, same pattern. One end to the other and back. I got out of bed and went to the door. There was a small window in it, about head height. I looked out but couldn't see anything. It was a moonless night, and even with my headlamp, I could only see a few feet beyond the window. "This is Park Service," I called out. "Identify yourself." The footsteps stopped again. This time I heard breathing. Deep, heavy breaths right on the other side of the door. Not panting like a dog, not snorting like a bear. Breathing like a person who just finished running. I backed away from the door, suddenly very aware that I was alone in the middle of nowhere with no cell service and a radio that might not work in the middle of the night. The breathing continued for what felt like hours but was probably only a few minutes. Then it stopped. I heard the footsteps go down the porch steps and fade away into the darkness. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. I sat on my bed with my back against the wall, a can of bear spray in one hand and my radio in the other, waiting for dawn. When the sun finally came up, I grabbed my headlamp and went outside to investigate. The porch was covered in dust and pollen as it had been since I'd arrived. But there were no footprints in it. The wooden steps showed no signs of disturbance. I walked around the entire cabin looking for tracks in the dirt, broken branches, anything. There was nothing. I radioed in my morning check. Bill answered and I almost told him what had happened. But I didn't. I was embarrassed, convinced I'd been half asleep and imagined the whole thing. So I just gave my standard report. All clear, no issues. The next 2 nights were quiet. I started to relax, to convince myself that first incident had been a dream or a bear or something mundane that I'd blown out of proportion in my half-awake state. On the 7th night, I was proven wrong. I was sitting at the desk, writing in my journal by lamplight, when all the light in the cabin went out at once. Not flickered, not dimmed. Just instantly went from light to absolute darkness. I fumbled for my headlamp and turned it on. The lamp on the desk was still lit, I could see the flame through the glass, but it was producing no light. It was like the light itself was being absorbed by the darkness. Then I heard it, scratching at the door. Not like a bear or a mountain lion. Rhythmic, deliberate scratching, like someone drawing their fingernails down the wood in long, slow strokes. I grabbed my radio. "Base, this is Dead Man's Hollow, do you copy?" Static. I tried again. More static. The radio had been working fine 6 hours ago during my check-in. The scratching continued. I could hear wood splintering. Whatever was out there was strong. I thought about the can of bear spray, but bear spray wouldn't do much if this thing got through the door. Then the scratching stopped. For a moment there was absolute silence. Then something hit the door. A massive impact that made the whole cabin shake. It hit again. And again. The door was solid wood and the frame was reinforced, but I could see it starting to bend inward with each impact. I looked around frantically for a weapon, for escape, for anything. The cabin had 1 door and 2 small windows, both too small for me to fit through. I grabbed the fire poker from beside the wood stove. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. The impact stopped. I heard that breathing again right outside the door. Then a voice. I'm not sure how else to describe it. It was like someone trying to speak but not quite getting the sounds right. Guttural and wrong but forming words. "Open," it said. Or something close to open. The word was stretched out and malformed. I didn't respond. I backed into the far corner of the cabin, fire poker raised. "Open," it said again, louder this time. Then the door handle started to turn. Slowly, deliberately. The door was locked with a slide bolt, and I watched in horror as the handle turned back and forth as whatever was out there tested it. This went on for minutes. The thing outside trying the door, occasionally hitting it, always coming back to slowly turning the handle. Then suddenly it stopped. I heard footsteps moving away from the cabin. Heavy footsteps that shook the ground slightly with each impact. They faded into the distance, and then there was silence again. I stood in that corner for the rest of the night, fire poker in hand, watching the door. When dawn finally came and light started filtering through the windows, I saw that the lamp on the desk was still burning, now producing light normally as if nothing had happened. The door was deeply scratched, long gouges in the wood that looked like they'd been made with claws or knives. The frame was cracked from the impacts, but the door had held. I packed my gear as fast as I could. I radioed base, and this time I told Bill everything. There was a long pause when I finished. "Get back here," he said finally. "Now." I hiked out in record time, constantly looking over my shoulder. When I got back to the main station, Bill and Sarah were waiting for me. They didn't look surprised. "You should have told me after the first night," Bill said, but he didn't sound angry. He sounded tired. Sarah made coffee, and they told me the truth about Dead Man's Hollow. Every ranger who'd stayed there for more than a few days reported similar experiences. Footsteps, scratching, impacts on the door, that voice trying to form words. It had been happening since the cabin was built in the 1960s and probably long before that. "Why do we keep sending people there?" I asked. "Because it's our job," Bill said. "The Park Service doesn't officially recognize paranormal activity as a reason to abandon a station. We've filed reports, but they get ignored. So we keep manning it, and we try to rotate people out before anything too bad happens." "Has anything too bad happened?" I asked. They exchanged a look. Sarah spoke. "In 1983, a ranger named Tom Miller was stationed there for 3 weeks. After 2 weeks, he stopped checking in. When they went to investigate, they found the cabin empty. The door had been torn off its hinges from the outside. Tom's gear was all there, even his truck, but he was gone. They searched for weeks but never found any trace of him. They think what happened to the prospector, the guy the hollow is named after, has something to do with it," Bill added. "Whatever killed him might still be there. Or maybe it's drawn to that place for some reason. We don't know. But people have learned to just survive their assignment and get out." I never went back to Dead Man's Hollow. I finished out that season at other stations, but I quit the Forest Service after that summer. I told my friends and family it was because I'd gotten a better job offer, which was true. But the real reason was that I couldn't handle the idea that there were places like Dead Man's Hollow out there, and that the people in charge knew about them and just accepted them as part of the job. I still follow the news from that park. 2 years ago, they finally closed the Dead Man's Hollow station, officially because of budget cuts. But I heard from Sarah that the real reason was that another ranger had gone missing. They found his truck and gear and the cabin door torn off its hinges, just like Tom Miller. The station is still there as far as I know. Abandoned, sitting in that silent hollow with whatever still lives there. Sometimes I wonder if it gets lonely now that nobody comes anymore. Then I remember that voice stretching and bending human words into something else, and I think maybe it's better that way. Some things are better left alone in the dark. #story 3, the campfire that shouldn't exist. This story comes from my Uncle Dave. He's not the type to make things up or exaggerate. He spent 25 years in the Army, did 2 tours in Iraq, and I've never heard him express fear about anything. Which is why what he told me about his camping trip in Montana in 2015 stuck with me so much. He doesn't talk about it often, and when he does, you can see something in his eyes that wasn't there before that trip. In October 2015, Dave and 3 of his Army buddies decided to do a week-long elk hunting trip in the Bitterroot Mountains of western Montana. These weren't casual outdoorsmen. These were guys who'd done survival training, who'd operated in hostile environments, who knew how to handle themselves in dangerous situations. The group consisted of Dave, his friend Marcus, and 2 brothers named Jake and Connor. They drove up from Denver, arriving at their chosen trailhead on a Friday morning. The plan was to hike in about 12 miles, set up a base camp, and spend the week hunting from there. They'd done similar trips before, and everyone knew the routine. Pack heavy, hike far, get away from the casual hunters who stick close to roads. The weather was perfect for late October. Cold at night, crisp during the day, no sign of the early snow that sometimes hits that area. They made good time, reaching their planned campsite by mid-afternoon. It was a flat spot near a stream, surrounded by lodgepole pines with good visibility in all directions. Defensible, Dave called it, falling back on his military training. They set up their tents, established a cooking area, and hung their food properly to avoid bear encounters. By the time the sun went down, they had a good fire going and were settling in for the first night. They were about 4 hours from the nearest road, in an area that saw maybe a dozen hunters each season. They expected to be completely alone. On the first night, around 10 p.m., Jake pointed to something across the stream maybe 200 yards away. It was another campfire. They could see the orange glow through the trees, flickering in the darkness. "Guess we're not as isolated as we thought," Marcus said. He sounded disappointed but not concerned. Sometimes hunters do end up camping near each other, especially in areas with limited good campsites. "Should we go introduce ourselves?" Connor suggested. "There's an unspoken etiquette among backcountry hunters. You let each other know you're there, establish rough hunting zones to avoid conflicts or accidents." "In the morning," Dave said. "No point stumbling through the forest in the dark." They went to bed thinking nothing of it. Just another group of hunters in the area. The fire was out by the time Dave did a final check before turning in around midnight. The next morning they broke into two groups. Dave and Marcus headed north to scout for elk sign, while Jake and Connor went south. The plan was to meet back at camp by 4 p.m. to compare notes and plan the next day's hunt. Dave and Marcus had a good day. They found fresh elk droppings and rubs where bulls had been scraping their antlers against trees. They were heading back to camp around 3 p.m., taking a route that brought them near where they'd seen the campfire the night before. "Let's go introduce ourselves to the neighbors," Marcus suggested. They altered their course slightly and headed toward where the fire had been. They reached the spot within 20 minutes and found nothing. No campsite, no fire ring, no sign that anyone had ever been there. The forest floor was undisturbed, covered in a thick layer of pine needles that clearly hadn't been walked on in years. "Maybe we got turned around," Dave said, though he didn't believe it. He was good with land navigation, and they'd marked the location on their GPS the night before. This was definitely the right spot. They searched the area for another 30 minutes, expanding their radius. Nothing. No tracks, no broken branches, no trash, no fire ring. It was as if the campfire they'd all seen had never existed. When they got back to their own camp, Jake and Connor were already there. Dave mentioned the missing campsite, and Connor's expression changed. "That's weird," Connor said. "We saw smoke this afternoon. Around 2 o'clock, we were about a mile south of here, and we looked back toward camp. We could see two smoke columns. One from our fire, and one from over where you guys found nothing." They checked Connor's photos from the afternoon. He'd taken several pictures of the landscape, and sure enough, in the background of one shot, you could see two distinct columns of smoke rising above the trees. "Equipment malfunction?" Jake suggested, pointing at the camera. "Some kind of lens flare or reflection?" But they all knew that didn't make sense. You don't mistake lens flare for campfire smoke. That night, they kept their fire going later than usual. Nobody said it, but they were all a little unnerved. Around 11 p.m., the mysterious campfire appeared again. Same location, same orange glow through the trees. "Okay, fuck this," Marcus said. "I'm going over there right now. Anyone comes with me?" Dave and Jake volunteered. They grabbed their headlamps and their sidearms, which they'd brought for bear protection. The three of them crossed the stream and headed toward the fire. It took them about 15 minutes of careful walking to cover the 200 yards, moving slowly in the dark to avoid tripping. They could see the fire getting closer, brighter. They could even smell wood smoke now, pine burning, the familiar scent of a campfire. They reached the edge of a small clearing. The fire was right in the center, burning strongly. And there was nobody there. No tent, no gear, no people. Just a fire burning in a small pit, with no visible source of wood feeding it. Dave said they stood there for probably 5 minutes just staring at it. The fire was real. They could feel the heat from it. But it sat in the middle of this clearing, in a fire pit that looked like it had been used many times, surrounded by nothing. "Hello," Jake called out. His voice sounded small in the darkness. There was no response. Marcus walked closer to the fire, and Dave said that's when he noticed something that made his skin crawl. There were no shadows. The fire was burning, producing light, but it wasn't casting shadows properly. The trees around the clearing should have been throwing long, dancing shadows in the firelight, but they weren't. It was like the light from the fire wasn't interacting with the environment the way it should. "We need to leave," Dave said. "Now." Something in his tone made the others listen. They backed away from the fire, keeping their eyes on it, then turned and hurried back to their camp. None of them said much after they got back. Connor asked what they'd found, and all Dave could say was, "It's there, but it's wrong." They stayed up for another hour, watching the glow from across the stream. Around 1 a.m. it went out. Instantly, the way a candle goes out when you blow on it. 1 second it was there, the next it was gone. The next morning, all 4 of them went back to the site together. They found the clearing easily enough. And this time they found the fire pit. It was old, ringed with stones that were blackened from countless fires. But the thing that disturbed Dave the most was that the fire pit looked ancient. The stones had moss growing on them. The center of the pit was filled with pine needles and forest debris that would have taken years to accumulate. "This pit hasn't been used in decades," Connor said. He was right. If someone had been burning a fire there the night before, the pit would have been clean, the surrounding ground disturbed. Instead, it looked like it hadn't been touched in years. Jake found something near the pit. Partially buried in the forest floor was a metal stake, the kind you use to hang a lantern or tie a bear bag. It was so rusted that it crumbled when he tried to pull it out. Near it they found other artifacts. The aluminum frame of what had once been a backpack, so corroded it fell apart when Connor picked it up. Some camping items buried in the ground. How old is this stuff? Marcus wondered aloud. Dave had been in the army long enough to recognize old military gear when he saw it. The style of the backpack frame, the design of a canteen they uncovered. He estimated 60s or 70s. 40 or 50 years old, minimum. They decided to cut the trip short. For experienced guys, and they all independently agreed that something was wrong and they needed to leave. They packed up their camp that afternoon and hiked out, covering 12 miles faster than Dave thought possible. They didn't run, but they didn't dawdle either. On the drive back to Denver, they tried to rationalize what they'd seen. Optical illusions, someone playing an elaborate prank, hallucinations from altitude or dehydration. But none of them believed their own explanations. They'd all seen it. They had photographic evidence of smoke where no smoke should have been. Dave did some research after they got back. It took him a few weeks of digging through old newspaper archives and Forest Service records, but he found something that made his blood run cold. In September 1976, 2 hunters from Missoula were reported missing in the Bitterroot Mountains. Their truck was found at a trailhead, but they never returned. A search was conducted, but they were never found. The area where they'd planned to camp was approximately 12 miles from the trailhead where Dave and his friends had started their hike. Dave managed to contact the son of one of the missing hunters. The son was in his 50s now, but he remembered his father's planned trip clearly. He even had his father's old topographic maps with the planned route marked on them. The campsite that Dave and his friends had used was the exact location where the missing hunters had planned to make their base camp. "Did they ever find any sign of your father?" Dave asked. "Nothing," the son said. "It was like they vanished. The search and rescue team found no tracks, no gear, nothing. The only thing they found was an old fire pit at what they thought was the campsite, but it hadn't been used recently. They figured Dad and his friend had changed their plans and camped somewhere else, and then something happened to them." Dave thanked him and hung up. He told me he sat there for a long time after that call, thinking about those 2 hunters making camp in 1976, building their fire, settling in for the night. And then something happening. Something that left no trace except for an old fire pit and some buried gear. Now, sometimes a fire still burns there at night. A fire that shouldn't exist in a pit that hasn't been used in 50 years, casting light that doesn't make shadows. And Dave can't stop wondering if those hunters are still there in some way, still camping, still trying to warm themselves by their fire, not knowing that half a century has passed. Dave won't go back to Montana. He still hunts, but he sticks to Wyoming and Colorado now. When I asked him why the fire and the abandoned camp bothered him so much, more than anything he'd seen in Iraq, he said something that stuck with me. "In war, you know what the dangers are. People trying to kill you, IEDs, bullets. It's all real and concrete. But that fire was something else. It was evidence that reality isn't as solid as we think it is. That there are places where the rules don't work right, where the past bleeds into the present in ways we can't understand or control. And if that's true, if there are places where normal reality just breaks down, then what else is out there that we don't know about? Marcus, Jake, and Connor never went back either. They sold their hunting permits for Montana the following year. They still get together for hunting trips, but they plan their routes carefully now, checking historical records for any reports of disappearances or strange occurrences in the areas they're considering. Last year, Dave told me he'd been contacted by someone from the Forest Service. They were doing a study on hunter safety and had come across his permit from 2015. They wanted to know if he'd experienced anything unusual during his trip that year, anything at all. Dave asked why they were asking, and the person on the phone was silent for a moment before saying that there had been an increase in reports of strange phenomena in that particular area over the past decade. What kind of phenomena? Dave asked. Unexplained lights, sounds, missing equipment, and campfires where no one should be camping, the person said. We're trying to determine if there's a natural explanation or if we need to consider closing that section of the forest. Dave told them everything. About the fire that appeared and disappeared, about the old campsite that showed up on camera as smoke but had clearly been abandoned for decades, about the missing hunters from 1976. When he finished, there was another long silence. Thank you for your report, the person finally said. We're adding this to the file. Between you and me, there are 17 similar reports from that area going back to 1982. We don't know what to make of it, but we're considering posting warnings at the trailhead. Dave asked if they'd found any evidence of what might be causing it. The person said no, they hadn't. But then they added something that Dave found more disturbing than anything else. We sent a team in there last summer to investigate. 2 rangers, both experienced backcountry specialists. They were supposed to be there for 3 days. On the second night, they radioed in saying they'd seen the fire and were going to investigate. That was the last transmission we received. We found them the next morning at the trailhead next to their truck. They'd hiked 12 miles out in the middle of the night. When we asked them what happened, they refused to talk about it. Both of them quit the Forest Service a week later. Dave asked if he could speak to them, but the person said they both moved out of state and weren't interested in discussing what they'd experienced. The area is still open to the public. There's no warning sign at the trailhead. The Forest Service officially states there are no known hazards in that area beyond the usual risks of backcountry travel. But if you talk to local outfitters and guides in that part of Montana, they'll tell you something different. They'll tell you to avoid that particular valley, especially in late October when the veil between the past and present seems thinnest. And if you're ever camping in the wilderness and you see a campfire burning in the distance where you know no one should be, Dave's advice is simple. Don't investigate. Don't try to find a rational explanation. Pack up your camp even if it's the middle of the night and leave. Because some fires burn for reasons we can't understand in places where time doesn't work the way it should, and approaching them means risking more than just your safety. It means risking the possibility that you might end up like those hunters from 1976, trapped in an endless loop of the same night, forever trying to warm yourself by a fire that will never go out and never keep you warm. Dave still has the GPS coordinates saved. He won't delete them, though he's never shared them with anyone except the Forest Service. He says it's because someone needs to know where it is, in case someone else goes missing there. But I think it's more than that. I think he keeps those coordinates as a reminder that there are places in this world that humans aren't meant to go, questions we aren't meant to ask, and fires we aren't meant to sit beside. The wilderness is vast and beautiful and mostly safe. But there are pockets, small areas scattered throughout the backcountry where the rules change, where the natural and supernatural blur together in ways that defy explanation. The campfire that shouldn't exist is just one of them. And if you spend enough time in the deep woods, if you venture far enough from the trails and the roads and the safety of civilization, you might find others. Dave still dreams about that fire sometimes. He'll be back in that clearing, feeling the heat that doesn't cast proper shadows, smelling the smoke from wood that isn't there. And in his dreams, he can see figures sitting around the fire. 2 men wearing hunting gear from the 1970s, staring into the flames. They never look up at him. They never acknowledge his presence. They just sit there, feeding wood to a fire that's been burning for almost 50 years, waiting for a morning that will never come. When he wakes up from these dreams, Dave will go outside even in the middle of winter and just stand there breathing the cold air, reminding himself that he's home, that he's safe, that he made it out. Unlike those two hunters who sit by their eternal fire, he escaped that valley. But part of him, he admits, will always be there, standing at the edge of that clearing, watching that impossible fire burn, and wondering what would have happened if he'd stepped closer, if he'd sat down beside those flames, if he'd stayed just a little bit longer. That's the thing about the wilderness. It holds on to things. Memories, tragedies, moments frozen in time. And sometimes, on cold October nights in forgotten valleys in the mountains of Montana, those frozen moments thaw just enough for the living to catch a glimpse of them. Just enough to remind us that we're walking through a world far older and stranger than we understand, where the line between now and then, between real and impossible, is thinner than we'd like to believe. So if you're planning a camping trip, choose your location carefully. Check the history of the area. Ask locals about strange occurrences. And if you see a campfire where no campfire should be, remember what happened to Dave and his friends. Remember the hunters who never came home. And most importantly, remember that some invitations are better left unanswered, some camps are better left unvisited, and some fires are better left to burn alone in the darkness, keeping company with ghosts who don't know they're dead. End of stories. These three accounts represent just a fraction of the strange encounters that happen in America's wilderness areas every year. Most go unreported. Most people, like Dave and Marcus and the ranger I used to work with, choose not to talk about what they've experienced, knowing they'll be met with skepticism or ridicule. But the stories persist. Passed between hikers at trailheads, shared in hushed voices around campfires, posted anonymously on internet forums. Stories of things that whistle in the night, of places where reality bends and breaks, of fires that burn without fuel and without end. The forest keeps its secrets. And sometimes, if you venture deep enough, if you stay long enough, if you're unlucky enough, the forest will share those secrets with you. Whether you want it to or not. Stay safe out there. Watch the tree line. Trust your instincts. And remember, not everything you encounter in the wilderness is natural, not every sound has a rational explanation, and not every campfire you see should be approached. The woods are waiting. They've been waiting for a long time. And they're very, very patient.